Ethan Cole had always lived a life that felt smaller than it should have been. At 26, he worked long hours at a logistics company, handling numbers that didn't belong to him, solving problems that weren't his, and going home to a quiet apartment that never really felt like home. He wasn't unhappy, not exactly, but he wasn't living either. He existed somewhere in between, like a pause that never ended. That night, like many others, Ethan came home late, exhausted. He dropped his bag by the door, loosened his collar, and walked straight to his bedroom without turning on the lights. His mind was heavy, but his body was heavier. Sleep came quickly, but something was different. At first, it was just warmth, a strange, comforting warmth that didn't belong to his usual cold bed. His brows furrowed slightly in his sleep, his hand shifting across the sheets, and then stopping. Soft, fur. Ethan's eyes snapped open. For a moment, his brain refused to process what he was seeing. Four small wolf pups were curled up around him. One was tucked near his chest, its tiny body rising and falling with slow breaths. Another had claimed his arm like a pillow. The third was at his feet, tail flicking lazily even in sleep. And the fourth, slightly bigger than the others, was resting near his shoulder, its head lifted, watching him with calm, intelligent eyes. Ethan didn't move. "What?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. His heart started racing, but strangely, he didn't feel fear. He should have panicked. He should have jumped out of bed, called someone, done anything. But instead, he just looked at them. The pup near his chest stirred first, letting out a soft whine before pressing closer, as if seeking comfort. Ethan's breath hitched. They weren't aggressive. They weren't wild. They felt safe. Slowly, cautiously, Ethan lifted his hand and placed it on the smallest one. The pup didn't flinch. Instead, it leaned into his touch. A warmth spread through Ethan's chest. Unexpected, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. "What are you doing here?" he murmured. The larger pup near his shoulder tilted its head slightly, as if it understood. For a long time, Ethan just sat there, surrounded by creatures that made no sense, in a situation that felt impossible. And yet, for the first time in years, his mind wasn't crowded with worries. It was quiet, peaceful. He didn't realize when he fell back asleep. The knock came early, sharp, firm, unavoidable. Ethan groaned softly, his eyes fluttering open for a brief moment. He thought it had all been a dream, until he felt again. Warmth. Wait. He looked down. The pups were still there, all four of them. One of them yawned, stretching lazily, while another lifted its head as if sensing something beyond the room. The knock came again. Ethan sat up quickly this time, his heart pounding. "Coming," he called out, his voice unsteady. He hesitated, glancing back at the pups. Stay here," he said awkwardly, as if they would understand. To his surprise, they didn't move. Ethan stood up, ran a hand through his messy hair, and walked toward the door. The moment he opened it, everything changed. Four men stood outside. They were impossible to ignore. Each of them had a presence that filled the hallway, tall, composed, and undeniably powerful in a way Ethan couldn't quite explain. Their eyes were sharp, observant, and all of them were looking directly at him. The one in front stepped forward slightly. "You're Ethan Cole?" he asked. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes?" There was a brief silence. Then the man said something that made Ethan's entire world tilt. "Our wolves chose you." Ethan blinked. "What?" Another man, standing slightly behind, crossed his arms. "They found you first. That doesn't happen by accident." Ethan's mind struggled to catch up. "I think you have the wrong person." "We don't," the first man said. There was no hesitation in his tone. No doubt. Ethan swallowed, his grip tightening on the door. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about, but..." "For Pups," the third man interrupted quietly. "In your bed." Ethan froze. His silence was enough. The men exchanged glances, something unspoken passing between them. Then the fourth one, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward. His expression was softer, but his gaze was just as intense. "They're ours," he said gently, "and they don't go to just anyone." Ethan felt his pulse in his ears. "I didn't take them," he said quickly. "They were just there when I woke up." We know, the first man replied. Ethan frowned. Then why are you here? Another pause. Then, because they chose you, he repeated. And that means something. Ethan shook his head slightly, overwhelmed. I don't understand. You will, the second man said. But first, can we come in? Ethan hesitated. Everything about this was wrong. Strange men, strange words, strange situation. And yet, something in him said yes. He stepped aside slowly. They entered without hesitation. The moment they crossed into the apartment, everything shifted. The air felt heavier, charged, alive. The pups reacted instantly. Ethan barely had time to turn before they came running out of the bedroom, their small paws tapping against the floor. They didn't go to the men. They went to Ethan, clustering around his legs, pressing against him, as if seeking protection. The room went silent. The four men watched this with expressions that ranged from surprise to something deeper. The first man exhaled slowly. That confirms it. Ethan looked down at the pups, then back at them. Confirms what? The man met his eyes. That you're not just involved anymore. You're part of this now. Ethan's chest tightened. Part of what? No one answered immediately. Instead, the quiet one, the one who had spoken gently before, knelt down near the pups. One of them looked at him, then turned away, pressing closer to Ethan instead. The man's expression softened, almost bittersweet. They've already made their choice, he said. Ethan's throat felt dry. Choice for what? The first man stepped closer. For their future. Ethan let out a breathless laugh, shaking his head. You're not making any sense. But deep down, something inside him knew this wasn't a joke, wasn't a mistake. The man's voice dropped slightly. Our world is not the same as yours, Ethan. And somehow you step right into it. Ethan looked at the four pups clinging to him, at the four men watching him like he mattered, like he was important. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt like the center of something bigger than himself, and that terrified him. I didn't choose this, he whispered. The man's gaze didn't waver. No, he said quietly, but they did. And as Ethan stood there, surrounded by wolves and strangers in a reality that no longer made sense, he realized something even more unsettling. For the first time in years, he didn't want to run away. Ethan didn't sleep that night. Not really. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, while the four pups stayed close to him, closer than before, as if they could feel the storm building inside his mind. Every time he shifted, they adjusted with him, pressing against him like he was their anchor. Across the apartment, the four men remained. They didn't force anything, didn't rush him, but their presence alone was enough to remind Ethan that his life had already changed, and there was no going back. By morning, exhaustion had settled into his bones, but clarity had begun to replace fear. Ethan sat up slowly, the pups waking with him. One of them, his favorite, though he didn't admit it, climbed into his lap, curling into a small, warm ball. You're really not going anywhere, are you? He murmured. From the doorway, a voice answered. No. Ethan looked up. It was the quiet one, the one with the gentler eyes. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely, watching Ethan in a way that didn't feel threatening, but didn't feel casual either. You should know our names, he said. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. I guess I should. The man stepped forward slightly. I'm Adrian. He gestured behind him. That's Marcus, Daniel, and Ryan. Ethan glanced at each of them in turn. Marcus, the one who spoke like everything was already decided. Daniel, the observant one, always watching, always thinking. Ryan, the sharp one, guarded and unreadable. And Adrian was the only one who looked at Ethan like he was human first, and something else second. Ethan swallowed. Okay, now what? Marcus stepped forward. Now we explain. The truth wasn't easy to accept. Ethan sat at the edge of his bed as the four men told him everything about their world, about wolves that weren't just wolves, about bonds that went deeper than logic. These pups, Daniel explained, kneeling beside one of them, they're not just animals. They're extensions of us, of who we are. Ethan frowned. Then why are they here with me? Silence. Then Adrian spoke. Because they chose you as their omega. The word hit differently. Ethan stiffened. I'm not. It's not about what you think, Adrian interrupted gently. It's not about weakness or labels. It's about connection, trust, instinct, Marcus added. And it's not something that happens randomly, not four at once. Ethan looked down at the pups again. They looked back, completely at ease, completely sure. What does that mean for me? He asked quietly. Ryan answered this time. It means your life won't be yours alone anymore. The word should have scared him, and they did, but not in the way he expected, because for the first time, alone didn't sound comforting. Days turned into something unfamiliar. Ethan didn't go to work, didn't check his phone, didn't return to his old routine. Instead, he stayed, and they stayed with him. At first, it was tense, uncertain. Ethan didn't know how to act around them, and they didn't push him to figure it out. But the pups, they made everything easier. They followed him everywhere. If he moved, they moved. If he sat, they climbed onto him. If he felt overwhelmed, they pressed closer, grounding him in a way nothing else ever had. And slowly, the distance between Ethan and the four men began to close. Marcus was strict but protective. Daniel explained things patiently, never rushing him. Ryan stayed distant at first, but Ethan noticed the way he always stayed nearby, watching over him without saying a word. And Adrian became the one Ethan talked to, late at night, when everything felt too real. Why me? Ethan asked one evening. Sitting by the window, one of the pups asleep in his lap. Adrian stood beside him, quiet for a moment. Do you really want the answer? He asked. Ethan nodded. Adrian exhaled softly. Because you needed them just as much as they needed you. Ethan's chest tightened. That's not a reason, he said. It is, Adrian replied. You've been alone for a long time, Ethan. Not just physically, but here. He tapped lightly over his own chest. Ethan looked away. He didn't deny it, because he couldn't. The change didn't happen all at once. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow, subtle, real. Ethan started noticing things. About himself, about them, about the connection that seemed to grow stronger every day. The pups became more attached, more responsive, more aware. And then one morning, everything shifted again. Ethan woke up to silence. No warmth, no movement. He sat up quickly. They're gone. Panic rose instantly. He stood up, heart racing. And then the door opened. The four men walked in. But something was different. Ethan froze, because behind them, four young men stood, not strangers, not entirely, but not the same either. Ethan's breath caught. The pups, he whispered. Daniel nodded. They've grown. Ethan's mind struggled to catch up. That fast? Marcus stepped forward. They're not bound by normal rules. The four young men looked at Ethan, and then they moved toward him, without hesitation, without doubt, just like before. One stopped right in front of him, his voice soft. We remember you. Ethan's eyes widened. Another smiled slightly. You're still our choice. Something inside Ethan broke, not in pain, but in release. All the loneliness, all the emptiness, all the years of feeling like he didn't belong anywhere, it shattered in that moment. You really, his voice shook, chose me? Adrian stepped closer. All of us did. Ethan looked around, at all of them, at the life he never imagined. And for the first time, he didn't feel small anymore. Months later, Ethan stood in a place he once thought he'd never reach. A home that wasn't empty. A life that wasn't quiet. A future that wasn't uncertain. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. The bond he once feared had become his strength. The people he once didn't understand had become his family. And the love he never thought he deserved had found him anyway. Adrian stood beside him, his hand brushing lightly against Ethan's. You stayed, he said softly. Ethan smiled. Yeah, he replied. I stayed. Because sometimes the life you never expected is the one that finally makes you whole. And for Ethan Cole, being chosen was the beginning, not the end.